Hey there, YouTube. So today I just want to talk about my experience with ayahuasca because I can't believe I never told you about it before. So I was about 32 years old. I took a trip to Colombia, South America. It was for an ayahuasca ceremony. Just a little bit of background about my beliefs. I am a skeptic. I was always a skeptic. I was born into a Catholic religion, but I never bought into any of that. Even as a young child, I never subscribed to that belief system of organized religion. So I was born a skeptic. I don't believe anything unless it's based by science. And that being said, I have had a few spiritual things happen to me in my life, some personal experiences that cannot be explained with science, although I tried. I talked about my experiences in the past videos from last summer, so I won't talk about them again in this video. This video I want to talk about my experience with ayahuasca, because if you knew me in real life, like almost every conversation I have, I sprinkle in a little bit something about ayahuasca because it taught me so much. It's like the foundation to my belief system now, and it's important for me to share it with you guys, what I have learned. I don't want to get into every little thing that I learned because it's way too much, and I just want to focus on the main thing, a couple main things that I learned while doing ayahuasca. So I was about 32 years old, and I was a lost individual at the time. I didn't know what to do with my life, and I decided to go to Colombia for an ayahuasca retreat. So ayahuasca is made from two ingredients, a certain kind of leaf and a certain kind of root. And when you mix these two ingredients together, they create a hallucinogenic effect on the brain. This is what DMT is. Ayahuasca is essentially DMT. The most powerful form of DMT, I believe, is when it is smoked, but the effects last very quick. It's like a 5-minute, you are out of your body, you're in another dimension kind of thing, and it lasts for 5 minutes. But with this ayahuasca ceremony, it lasts about 9 hours. You ingest it, it tastes horrible, you throw up a lot, and you are essentially connected to, like you're plugged into the internet almost, and your brain is the modem. I went to this retreat. I drank the Kool-Aid, and what happened was that I did cross over into another realm. It felt like there was a doorway, and I was just on the threshold of this doorway, and I crossed into it, and I call it the void. I know it's like a void is empty, but this was a void of everything. It was just existence itself. It was like, I called it a void because there was no other name for it. Like it doesn't cross over into our language. There's a language barrier. So all I could call it is a void. And what this is just, it's like plugging into pure information is the best way to put it. It was like, for the first time, I was able to understand the universe in the form of information. It was just, all this information was, wanted to come into me, and I could pick and choose. Like, it wasn't all at once. It was kind of like, whatever I focused on, whatever I was giving my energy to, that is the information that was coming to me. And it wasn't in the form of language, it was in the form of emotions And not really emotions. It was more like I can't, again, it's like you can't explain it in words. There is a language barrier. It's something that you just have to experience yourself. So I was connected to information, and I immediately realized, oh wow, okay, so we definitely exist after we die. Like, that, it's not even a question. Like, it's matter of fact. Oh, okay, so I'm eternal. This is crazy. Wow. Like, and it was just, I automatically knew, and it was very real. It was like matter of fact, knowing that we don't die when our bodies die. And then I asked ayahuasca, I said, well, okay, we don't die, but does that mean there's a heaven? And yes, there's infinite heavens that exist. And I asked, if heaven exists, does that mean there's a hell? And ayahuasca said, yes, there are infinite number of hells exist. And I said, well, if hell exists, then evil must exist. There must be a devil. And ayahuasca said, there are infinite numbers of devils, hells. There is evil. Evil does exist, but not in the form that I believe it is. Essentially, ayahuasca told me that evil does exist, but it's not what we think it is. So I asked, well, what is evil? What is it? And ayahuasca said the only evil that exists is fear. Fear is the only evil. Now, just sink that in. Let that sink in for a minute. There's not a real devil. There's not a real Satan. There aren't demons. Okay? It's all fear. That's what ayahuasca was telling me. Evil does not exist. Only fear exists. So anytime you see an evil person doing an evil act, all that means is that person is very fearful, and they're doing something from their fear. Their fear is deciding things for them. Their fear is making choices for them. Babies aren't born evil, but they can be born having a high amount of fear due to a neurological condition, a chemical deficiency. I've had my fair share of anxiety, and from my personal experience with anxiety, all it is fear. I do know exactly what it feels like to have a lot of fear, and I wouldn't say that because of those anxiety attacks, I would never go out and kill somebody and or I don't know, be like completely nuts and hurt people because of my fear. So maybe it's not just fear that causes evil. It's a mixture of fear and something else, but I don't know what that something else is. I just thought of this now, that like while I'm having anxiety attacks, I don't feel like I'm gonna go out and shoot up people and bomb things during an anxiety attack. So I think fear by itself doesn't do these things. I don't know if I want to do ayahuasca again, honestly, because it tastes so bad. I've already done it 9 times. But yeah, I feel like this is a question for ayahuasca, or maybe if I have mushrooms or edible edible brownie, like a marijuana brownie, maybe I could figure it out. What ayahuasca told me, that's a big thing ayahuasca told me, is that the only evil is fear, and that's it. And then I asked, well, what is fear? Where does fear come from? And ayahuasca told me that the only fear is our fear of death. Ayahuasca said specifically that the only fear that really exists is our fear of death. And I know that a lot of you just tuned out right now, that you don't believe that, you don't buy into that. And I didn't either, but the more I thought about it, the more I understood, because I asked ayahuasca all these scenarios that, you know, are fearful, that don't have anything to do with death. Like, why am I so scared of public speaking? Why am I scared of not being successful? Those were like my major fears. I never was really fearful of death. The only time I was fearful of death was during a panic attack, and that was it. Like right now, I'm not afraid to die in the slightest bit. I am not afraid. But yeah, when I have a panic attack, that it's complete opposite. I'm terrified of death. Here it is, my little vape shop. I need to get some vape juice. Vape juice. So what was I saying? What was I saying? Oh, so I asked ayahuasca, you know, how all these things can relate to death, and I got an answer each time I asked. I said, what does fear of death have to do with not being successful? Ayahuasca said, well, if you're not successful, you're not going to have any money. You're not going to be able to take care of yourself if something were bad to happen to you. You wouldn't be able to get the right care. You would most likely die if you have no money to save yourself. And I asked, why am I afraid of public speaking? What does that have to do with the fear of death? And ayahuasca said, well, if you're afraid of being humiliated and ostracized, you're going to be judged and outcast from the group. People who are outcast have a lesser chance of surviving on their own, because people are, by nature, we're packed animals, and we need each other in order to survive. And if we're ousted, if we're away from the group, banished, we have less of a chance of survival. We won't live a long, healthy life if people don't like us, basically. So fear of public speaking ends up having a lot to do with the fear of death. Everything, every single fear that we could think of, we can tie it to the fear of death. And I got a visual in my mind while I was talking, having a conversation with ayahuasca. I got a visual of a tree and all its little branches. It wasn't a visual. I was just outside. I was looking at trees, and ayahuasca said, see, this is your ego right here, the trunk, and then all these little branches are how everything connects to your ego. And I was like, what does ego have to do with anything? And ayahuasca said, well, ego is your fear of death. That's what ego is. A lot of you may have had experience with your ego before, usually through the use of some type of hallucinogen. You're able to separate yourself from yourself for the first time. You can't really do it unless you're having some kind of either a hallucinogen or deep meditation, and then you're able to get it. Like you could say, oh yeah, that's who I am. I see it now. And that's why people who, I don't want to say drugs, people who do drugs often talk about separation from their ego. And so I started experiencing separation from my ego when I did ayahuasca. So I understand now what that means. And ego is the fear of death. And every single decision that we make, everything about who we are, our whole identity is tied into the fear of death. Every decision we make. And it made so much sense, guys. Like, when I was talking to this informational void, I was just so in awe of it that I started crying because it was so amazing. With ayahuasca, I wasn't drugged in a way where I felt euphoric and my movements felt funny and shaky or wavy or anything like that. I was completely coherent. When I'm drinking alcohol, I am less coherent drinking alcohol than when I do ayahuasca. With ayahuasca, I could remember everything. There are no blackouts. I walk upright without wobble. Well, I don't know. Maybe I do wobble. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is my mind was completely intact. When I drink alcohol, my mind is not intact. I get silly and funny, and I just love everybody. But when I do ayahuasca, who I am now talking to you is this. It doesn't change while I'm doing ayahuasca. I still sound coherent and not like a stupid drunk idiot. That's what I'm trying to say. So while I was getting this information from the void, I was just so amazed by it that I couldn't help but cry because it was incredible, absolutely incredible. I didn't think of these things by myself. They were just there in my head. The minute I asked, the exact same time I asked a question was the exact same time I received an answer. It was instant answer. And these answers didn't come from me. They didn't come from my brain. It was just out there in the universe. Anyway, guys, I gotta go get my vape juice. What time is it? 4:12. I have to get my vape juice, go back home, and then I'm gonna go to Spartans because my friends want to meet up for dinner. And I don't know, I just feel so good today. I've been taking vitamin B1. B1 is a thiamine, and I think maybe that has a reason why I feel so good. But since I hired these 2 new therapists, I haven't been as stressed. So I'm working less. I'm not as stressed, and things are just, I feel so good today. Normally I'm exhausted and I'm grumpy, but now I feel really good, and my friends want to go to dinner, and I feel like I'm really excited about it just because my body is feeling good and I'm in a good place mentally. Anyway, I gotta go get this vape fluid, guys. I could talk for hours, and I'm not a talker in real life. It's just when I'm here on the trike. Okay, I'll be right back. Hold on. Okay, guys, I'm back. I got my vape fluid. Did you know that vape stores are banned in New York? I didn't know that. There was a comment. One of the commenters on my YouTube channel told me that. That is just horrible. Vaping isn't perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than all the thousands of chemicals that are inside cigarettes. Another thing that I asked ayahuasca, I asked if God exists, And ayahuasca said God both exists and doesn't exist. And I didn't understand what that meant. And I said, could you please explain? And ayahuasca said, nope, I can't explain. And I said, why can't you explain? And she said, that I don't have the emotional capacity to understand what she's talking about, because I've never made an emotional connection with this answer, and she can't give me an answer to something if there is no reference. There's no way for me to understand it, because there's no language. Ayahuasca doesn't talk in language, it's emotion. And she could only tell me answers to things that I have an emotional understanding for. So when I asked, well, how do I get this emotional understanding? And ayahuasca said, well, you gotta live. You have to live. You will learn by living. Another question I asked was, what is the point of our existence? Why are we even here? And ayahuasca said the whole point of being here is for us to evolve. And I asked, well, what are we evolving to? What's the point of evolving? And ayahuasca said, to understand the universe, to get closer to God. And I asked, well, how do we evolve? And ayahuasca said, we can only evolve together, and we can only evolve by suffering. So we are literally here to evolve, and we can only evolve by suffering. I'm not making any of this stuff up. This isn't coming from me. This is coming from something outside of myself. There is something called perennial philosophy, and according to perennial philosophy is basically an idea that all religions point to the same thing. And I do believe in this because people who have experienced transcendence, like a moment of enlightenment, they all glean the same answers. And that's what perennial philosophy is that we're all gleaning the same answers. And organized religions, at some point, they may have been founded on these answers, but they do get muddled through time. So the religions end up being very different from each other, but at one point they were a solid, the core of them were the same values and everything. But that thing with God, saying God both exists and doesn't exist, I'm not the only one who felt that. Now, when I did this ceremony, we were in a group setting. When I was talking to ayahuasca, I was off doing my own little thing, and everybody kind of kept to themselves. So it was only until after the ceremony is when people started to share their experiences, and they're like, yeah, God is here and he's not here. How is God here and not here at the same time? And I was like, oh my God, you guys. It was two young men who were like really debating this one, because they both got the same answer, and I got that same answer, and I was like, yeah, you guys, that's what ayahuasca told me too. That's so crazy that we're hearing the same answers. Like we're not talking to each other during this time while we're receiving these answers. So how are they getting the same answers as me? If you're ever planning on doing ayahuasca, I'm gonna have a separate video for that. And it's important to approach ayahuasca in a certain manner in order to get the full effects like I did. And I just want to make sure that everybody experiences this at least once in their life. It's so important to people who have a chronic illness. It is so valuable to have this experience with ayahuasca, because you realize, well, I may be dying, but I do live on. You know what? That thing that was missing, people who have a lot of fear, and they end up shooting up schools and whatnot. I believe it's a mixture of not just fear, but hatred. It's a mixture of fear and hatred. When they meet together, that is what forms violence. I know what it's like to want to hit somebody, because there's no other way to get your point across. It's like you're not using your words, you just want to hit them and slap it and cause them as much pain as they're causing you. I get that. I felt that. And I think it has to do with the feeling of hopelessness and hatred. Don't think too much on it, because if you start to understand it, it might mess you up. There was a saying about psychiatrists and psychologists. They are the craziest amongst anybody. And I believe that, because in order to be a psychologist, maybe not so much a psychiatrist, because they mainly focus on doling out drugs and stuff, but for a psychologist or a therapist or a counselor, those guys try to understand their patients and get into their heads. They try to understand what's going on, and in order to do that, a little piece of yourself has to follow. That, like, you become emotionally invested and you understand why this person is acting the way they are, and that's really the only way to do your job, is to understand, emotionally connect to people. And when that happens, it could mess with your own mind. Once you understand the mind of a crazy person, there's no stopping your own mind from becoming crazy. You know, a lot of new age people who believe in metaphysics and spirituality, a lot of them people sound crazy, and I don't want to be that. I'm a science person. I love science, and I value my experiences with ayahuasca and all those other experiences I had. I value them as like scientific discoveries, basically. You know, it's awesome. Frank Sinatra, My Way. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. I love Frank Sinatra and all these guys. I did it my way. Alright guys, so I'm here, I'm home safe. I'm gonna take the car to go out to eat with my friends, because I really want to have some drinks, you know, and I don't like to drink while I'm riding the trike. And I also really want to have, you know, I want to get my car washed too. I'm signed up to this car wash thing where I pay like $30 a month. I get unlimited car washes, but I didn't wash my car in a long time, because I just been riding the trike. So I got to do that. I got to get my car washed. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode of my experience with ayahuasca. I would like to talk more about it, because it's just really awesome experience. Okay, bye-bye.